They say first impressions are everything. Well, in this business that we call opera, you always want to make a good impression, whether it be an introduction or an audition. In our first episode, I and the editor-in-chief of Verismo Mag, Tanisha Mitchell, would like to introduce ourselves to our listening audience, hear where we started, where we are now, and where we are going. Juicy interludes, not your typical opera podcast. It may not be for everyone, but it just may be for that very one. I'm your host, Angela Renée Simpson. My name is Angela Renée Simpson. I am an opera singer. To be honest, I don't sing much right now, which is okay. I've been in the business over 30 years. I have not had the traditional career. My career is far from traditional. I went straight from school. I did not get my undergrad degree. I left maybe about 2 semesters before I would graduate. And I had too much of school. I was done with school. And I decided to put myself out there in the world as an opera singer. And 6 months later, I got my first professional gig outside of school, singing in Porgy and Bess at the Metropolitan Opera back in 1989. And from then on, how can I say this correct? It was a network. I would say networking. I made friends. Friends told me about auditions, about shows that were going on. Most of them were Porgy and Bess. I have made my career singing the role of Serena in many productions of Porgy and Bess, many productions. I made my La Scala debut singing Serena. And I've sung in just about every major opera house in the United States as a principal. So I have some experience. I won't say that I have, like I said, I didn't have the traditional career. I would consider myself a Verdi soprano. I haven't done major Italian operas, any major productions. I've made my name in new operas that were done. I made my name in some musical theater that was done in opera houses, namely Showboat. Showboat was the first Broadway musical that incorporated, first of all, had black and white actors on stage together, and incorporated some operatic singing within. It was Broadway singing and operatic singing. I did not go to a young artist program. I did not go through a young artist program. I went straight to work. And I have been working ever since, from one gig to the next gig to the next gig. Concerts, I've done a couple, but I've done oratorial work. And now I'm in my late 50s, and I am doing other things with my voice. I'm teaching. I am a voiceover actor. Those voices you hear in the commercials, that's what I do. I do just the interludes. That's another thing that I do. And I work as a vice chair in a nonprofit. So I do myriad other things. I have not given up singing, but singing is not what I'm doing right now. That's me in a nutshell. Ms. Editor-in-Chief.
Oh, Lord.
Let's hear from you.
Hey, Miss Angela. Well, one of the reasons why I thought you would be a great fit was the fact that you've come from an unconventional background. You're not from the typical line of work to get to the opera career. And I think that's very special. I'm also an opera singer, but I don't sing by profession. What can I say that? I mean, I sing as a part of my business, Opera Talks, that began, oh gosh, geez, over 7 years ago. But my main career is a librarian and an entrepreneur. And how I got my start really was being a librarian, going to school to become a librarian as a musician with a musical background and undergrad from Aaron Copland School of Music. That really was a full circle for me because I got to the Metropolitan Opera by doing my library degree internship. And during that time, I learned so much. I knew that music would be a part of my life in some kind of way. I wanted to do something connected to opera, but more behind the scenes. I'm a behind the scenes person anyway. So I worked in a library, public library on Long Island for years. And then also interning at the Metropolitan Opera and learning things behind the scenes and how the career, not only how the career works, but how productions are put together. I love to teach opera. And so I created Opera Talks in 2015. And I haven't looked back. I've done many programs for libraries, community centers, even personal parties, and even the Metropolitan Opera Guild. I put that together, and it was a full circle moment. But I think that both of our experiences are important because they are unconventional, and we know the inside, but also we are also on the outside. Mine would be working at a public library where you're dealing with the general public. It's really the cross section of what the masses are, and they're not exposed to opera all the time. There have been many people that I've led to opera houses because of the fact of my teaching, who've never gone before. And Angela, you could talk some more too about you being on the outside looking in on that side, because you've got much more experience than me in the industry and performing in the industry. What is it like when you're dealing with people from the outside and they ask you what you do?
Well, first of all, I want to say I didn't know you went to Aaron Copland School of Music.
Yes,
I did. Everybody was at Aaron Copland School of Music, Queens College, City University in New York. But typically, any African American opera singer, that's the first thing people say. I didn't know Black people sang opera. I didn't. That's the first thing. And everybody hears it. Everybody who's in the business hears it. And I said, yes, we do. And they want to know more about it. Some are curious, some are not curious, but some are curious. And of course, they always want you to prove it and sing something.
Yes.
And I always say no.
You say no, I do it. No, I do.
No. Well, I say no because that's what I did for a living. That's my livelihood. And so if your boss asked you to do, 2 days of work for free and don't get paid for it.
Right. I was in the library conference and I was really promoting Opera Talks. And somebody asked me, and I knew it. I was like, oh man, I know they're going to ask me. And somebody asked, well, can you just sing a little something? And I know what you mean though. I thought of you.
You have to prove it. You have to prove it.
You gotta prove it. Yeah. I thought of you. I said, Angela was on my shoulder like, girl, don't do it.
My thing is this: you can find me on YouTube. You can listen to me all day long. They're recording. You can find my DVD. The DVD I did on Amazon. You have a whole bunch of evidence to hear me sing. Me having to sing for you right now is to prove that I can sing. Is not my concern. So I always say that. But I get that. I didn't know Black people could sing opera, and most people that I meet have never been to an opera. They still feel it's an elitist art form that is very expensive to go, and that you have to dress up to go. You have to have an evening gown and tuxedo and all this. And I just had a discussion with, I went to my high school reunion, one of my high school reunions about a month ago, and I had a discussion with a classmate of mine. And I was telling her this. I said, you can wear what you're wearing right now and go to the opera. And they said, really? I said, yes. And find an affordable ticket. Sometimes you going to the opera is less expensive than going to see a Broadway show.
True.
Now you can go. And she's like, well, I never really considered even going to the opera. She said, I'm going to consider that now that I've spoken to you about it. I said, the synopsis, the storyline is always in the program, so you know what's going on. And the subtitles are always there for you in English, so you know what they're saying at the time. I had another friend of mine who I speak to on a weekly basis, and I asked her, had she ever been to an opera? And she said, no. And I said, why? She said, well, I didn't want to go and feel stupid.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, wow, wow. I was like, no, 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 no. That's not what, I mean, I get why she feels that way, but I explained to her, I said, no, she said, I don't know. I wouldn't know what's going on. I don't know I don't know the language. And I said, all that is explained to you.
That's one of the things that people, they tell me, they don't think they could keep up,
Right,
and they could keep up with the language and the action on stage. It's too
right.
much.
It's a lot going on. Right.
Mhm.
Um, I think the Met has the subtitles in the back of the seats,
Yes, they do.
behind in the seats, and then do they still have it above the stage also?
I haven't seen that lately.
Okay, so it's all behind the scenes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of trying to keep up with, because there's always some kind of action on the stage, unless someone is just singing an aria.
yeah.
So it's action and but it, because it's in a different language, you have to read what's going on and then bring your eyes back up, and it is a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. But I also tell them sometimes it's not what's being said, but how it's being sung. It's how it's being sung. It's not
Listen to
always
that,
what's
Spellman.
being said, right? It's how it's being sung.
How
And
it's
it's all
being
about
sung.
the music. It's about the music most of the time. So you either go and you love it, or you go and you glad you went, but you don't really care for it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But just go. Yeah. So we started this to bring our perspective to what we feel, what's happening in the business, what we see, what we observe, what we hear. And we're bringing this to those who are coming up, those who are in school right now, who have every intention of being in this business, or some of those who are already in the business, emerging artists, things
True.
like that. So
True.
I guess one of the biggest questions is, why does our perspective matter?
Oh, it
Yeah, you go
definitely
ahead.
matters.
Hmm.
And the why is the fact that we don't have any skin in the game.
Right.
Let's call it, as Iyanla said, let's call a thing a thing. I'm a businesswoman. Opera's been good to me off stage
Hmm.
because of my own creation. A lot of things that we see and we realize are things that people could benefit from. I believe so. I believe so too, because again, we're not afraid to say something. Lots of times when you are actively working in an industry, you do want to be careful with what you
Hmm.
say because you don't want it to affect your check. And I just think that the younger generation, I like to give to them more ideas of preparation, not even in the business, but really preparation to get to and through it with the things that we least think of. Well, we don't talk about money. We think about it, but we
Right.
don't talk about it.
So, but my perspective, why does it matter? It may not matter to some people. My perspective may not matter to some people, and that's okay. There may be some that may listen to what I have to say because of the experiences I've had. I'm hoping that I can enlighten those who are coming up after with some of my experiences and my ideas. And there may be some that they don't want to hear a word I have to say, and that's okay.
As we've seen.
Yeah, we've seen some clap back, and that was expected. That was
Well,
expected.
listen, I'm not in the business of pleasing anybody.
Hmm.
I'm in the business of sharing.
Hmm.
And as long as I have the purest intention in heart,
Right, right,
I'm not worried with people who don't agree. You don't have to agree.
right. We don't have to agree
You
with
don't
what we
have to
our
agree.
own personal opinions and our experiences and
Right.
ideas. You don't have to agree with them, and that's okay. If something that we say maybe something that we say hits home for somebody.
Yeah.
For those who are saying, well, why should your opinion matter that you're not even in the business? Okay, so 30 years I was in the business. Now I'm on the outside looking in, and I'm watching intently as to what's happening.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I'm going to give it both sides. And I always think about it, whenever I do a situation, I always think about the other person's perspective. So if I'm doing a performance, I always think, well, what if I was sitting in the audience? What would I want to see? You know what I mean? That
Right,
kind
right, right.
if these people have paid their money to come see me do a thing.
Yeah.
And so I have to do that thing to the best of my ability so it's worth their money, worth their coin they just spent.
Mm.
So I always put it in that perspective, not just how much applause can I get, and
How many
how
jobs?
much, yeah, how many jobs can I get? Of course
Yeah.
we need the jobs. We need, if you're doing this, you're trying to make a living. Understood.
Right.
I always put it from when I'm on stage, I take it from the audience perspective. If I'm sitting out here and I just pay 65, 75, 100, sometimes $200 to come see this performance, what are you going to give me? I'm going to give you everything I got. So make it worth the reason why you spent that money, and something you can come away with a good memory from. So those who say that my opinion doesn't matter because I'm no longer in the business, that's their opinion. Let's borrow that phrase. When you see something, say
Say
something.
something. Oh,
When
yes.
you see something, say something.
Oh, yes.
I want to
Oh,
borrow
yes.
that phrase. So, and I've seen a lot sitting from the other side of the river.
Well,
As a
I've seen a lot sitting on both sides,
mm-hmm.
because in the industry, behind the scenes, learning how the business works
Yeah.
is and when you are, aside from being a singer, because when you're a singer, there's an angst of getting on the stage. You
Mm-hmm.
want to show the world what you got. And I think that's such a beautiful feeling. I would never want to extinguish that in any hopeful. I would
Mm-hmm.
never want that. I want you to feel that. But you also have to understand that when that angst to get on stage, there are steps to it. And then after the steps, it's like, what do I do next? When I got to the Metropolitan Opera years ago as an intern, I didn't know. Have you ever heard of a plan artist? I never knew about a plan artist, that you get paid sort of like a 9 to 5. You're not doing the leading roles, but you're doing like the compromisal roles and stuff like that. I didn't know any of that. There's so many levels of how you can sing. One of the biggest things that there is that when you're in the industry, you tend to think that everybody wants that part on stage that's envied by all. But then when you're teaching people who are outside, like what you're saying, you think about the audience and what the audience doesn't care about that. The audience wants to be entertained. And so I think that's why both of our perspectives are important. I'm saying that as editor in chief.
Mm-hmm.
They are very important because of the experience that we both had on both sides. I love the energy that the new generation gives. I really do.
Yeah.
That wanting to change and wanting to do something. But oftentimes I see that, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen it with colleagues. When they get in there, they're not the same when they come out. I have seen that in our marketing video before, when we were talking about juicy interludes. And the first side was to interview opera singers to understand who they are. And then that sense evolved into, let's look at the ones who are coming up into the world. And you mentioned something really good, Angela, the mid-career too, emerging career. Now you're going to teach me something.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between an emerging artist and a young artist? Tell me, because is there a difference? Or
young artist program?
Yeah.
It's not called the emerging artist program.
That is so true. And I never realized that.
Young artists. So these are usually graduate students or students who have finished grad school. Mm-hmm. They are in young artist programs with certain companies, and they get coachings, they get voice lessons, they get to learn roles, and they get the opportunity to be on stage. I would think an emerging artist is something after that. This is someone who has come from a young artist program, and they are trying to get their face out there. And a lot of times the focus is looking for an agent, getting an agent representation.
I think a lot of times, even in hiring talent, a lot of times the committee, like even at a library, looking at, who are the young artists? But emerging artists do apply, but I never saw them as separate, but that is true. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, emerging artists at that point in time, they know you should know your voice type. You should know, and again, the voice changes. Don't get me wrong. As you
It
get
does.
older, it may deepen, it may heighten, it may, you may start off as one type of soprano and then end up being another type of soprano. You never know where it's going to take you. I would have to say, we always want to know what's a day like in Jesse Norman's life, or what's a day like in
Yes.
Leontine Price's life, or Luciano Pavarotti, or Bryn Terfel, singers that were before me
Right.
and were considered at that time stars, opera stars. So one event that stands out to me was when I was singing at La Scala. I was making my debut at La Scala at doing Porgy and Bess singing Serena. I was in the dressing rooms. The dressing rooms are very small. It's an old opera house. And there are pictures all over the place. There are photos of different stars and autographs and things like that. For me, it's hallowed ground. I don't know who was in here. Maybe this particular, maybe Leontine was sitting here at this dressing table, and maybe Maria Callas was sitting at this dressing. You just never know. So La Scala was a wonderful experience. But the one thing I wanted to talk about was um, coming out afterwards, after the show, and there are dozens of people at the stage door.
Mm.
You would expect that as a singer, you've seen that you come out of the stage door and there are people that want autographs and want pictures and want to speak to you and blah, 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 and tell you how wonderful they thought your performance was.
Mm.
But La Scala was something totally different.
Mm.
La Scala audience, everybody knows this. It's like the Apollo. They will boo you if they do not like you. They'll boo you in
Yes,
the middle of your aria
I've
if you are
heard.
not singing it well. To have them there asking for my autograph afterwards was wonderful. But it wasn't just that. It was having them there the next performance on the way into the theater asking for an autograph.
Wow.
That was amazing. I'm just like, okay, so I'm getting a little bit of an idea what it's like to be this quote unquote star in this production, and having audience members waiting outside before as you're walking in to get ready, wanting an autograph and a picture. So it was La Scala was a great, great, great experience. And I wish everyone the opportunity to sing at La Scala. I'm going to say it. I put that above the Metropolitan Opera. Experiences is what make you a better singer, a better performer, a better artist.
If you were to stand on stage and you had an auditorium full of the next stars in opera, and when I say star, it doesn't have to be somebody that does star roles. They could be comprimarios too. You have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of comprimario performers, like who's one that I love, Ferruccio Furonetto. I
Mm-hmm.
love him. But if you were on stage and you had to say something to these people, what would you say?
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
What's the Kool-Aid, Angela?
Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Okay. So these times are different than when I came up. Just like the times were different for the ones before me. Every generation is something different. You are a business. You're an artist who happens to run a business.
Right.
That is your artistry. Your artistry is your business. You have to think of it that way. Gone are the days of opera houses making stars. They don't make stars anymore.
Oh, so
They
true.
do not make opera houses do not make stars. If that's your responsibility of you being a star. If you walk in as a star, sing as a star, everyone else will see you as a star. I think if you think of it as a business, if you think of it analytically
Yes.
and not emotionally,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
you will do much better in
Yeah.
this career.
Yes.
Don't put everything into this. Don't put everything into this. Have something else. Some other thing that you can do to monetize. Something else where you can monetize, because again, this business comes in waves. You may have a career where you're singing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years back to back in a row, which is very hard to do, but it can be done. It's very difficult to do. And then you may have a time where the phone's not ringing at all for a year or two. I don't know what the reason could be for that. It could be a pandemic.
Yeah.
It could be the recession. It could be, any number of things.
I'm going to interject this as working backstage. Or it could be that it's not the director's vision.
Right.
Director, conductor may have a vision that you do not fit in. Doesn't mean that you are a terrible singer.
Don't take it personally.
Don't take it personally. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like what I do, because it has you think analytically about things. You don't get so caught up in the emotion of I got to do it, I got to do it. You have to get stuff done, but it makes you think and look at things from an analytical standpoint.
Too much control has been given, and who's singing what has been given to the directors. I think it should go back to the conductors who choose a singer on their merit and not what they look like. And whether they are Black, whether they are white, whether they are Asian, whether they are 5'2" or 6'4", or you could have a soprano who's 5'10" that sings Juliet down, but she's too tall. In their vision, she's too tall. They're going to pick the 5'4" soprano.
Oh, yes, I was told that. I was told that by a hiring person at a said opera company. And I was told that, this person told me within the last 10 years, it's changed from, okay, I want a soprano with this range and this ability, to what height she needs to be, this height, have the vocal ability now, but they need to look like this.
Well, what if they don't have the vocal depth? But see, this is the problem. If they don't have, they look like everything you want, but they do not have the vocal ability. Then what do? They take that one that don't have the vocal ability.
Mm.
Now we know this. We've seen this.
So that's something.
That's a whole other subject.
That's a whole other discussion.
But we've seen it. We've seen it time and time again. I remember when it was up to the conductor. The director did have some input. I'm not going to sit there and say that they didn't have some input, but it was up to the conductor. The conductor would always be there at the auditions to hear the voices. They liked what they liked, and they hired on the conductor's recommendation. If this is incorrect, anybody who is watching this and I am wrong, please let me know.
Yes, we're open to comments.
I don't know what happens, but I hear things. What I'm getting at is that sometimes the vocal quality is gone. They lean more toward the aesthetic than the vocal quality. And for me, that it's not going to make the audience happy.
Well, when you say audience, though, the audience is changing. And I think that this is a very important time for Juicy Interludes to launch. You have an audience that's been going to the opera for the last 40 years, and they're aging out.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking from an analytical perspective. Okay, so you're saying that people are hiring based on how people look and the voice. I'm not just saying that it's one over the other, but if a person is just getting into opera, they've never heard the people from back in the day, and they're just getting into it. You know what happens though? You're changing the aesthetic of why and how people listen to voices.
Right.
That's what's happening.
Right. Believe me, I've done master classes where I would talk about certain voices and they didn't know who that person was. And that's a shame.
Well, wait. But like who? Just give me one person.
Let's say Simon Estes. Didn't know who he was. Now, mind you, his career was made in Europe, but he's still an American.
Well, wait a minute. These are students now that didn't know?
I'm talking about master classes that I've done, and when I bring up, names. Renata Scatto. Yes, didn't know who she was. I mean, I understand, but if you're going into a profession, you need to know who did the profession before you. Yeah. What can you learn from them? Read up on them. Read if there's any books about them. Read up on them. See what they were about. What kind of career did they have? what lessons that they learned that they can impart on you. Even though it was a different time period, there probably is something that you can learn. You can always learn from any person, anyone else's experience. You can always learn from, no matter if they're 28 to
Yeah.
80. You can learn from someone else's experience.
But you know what? I think it's the generation too. We are bogged down, and now I'm speaking from a librarian's perspective. We're bogged down by so much information. You go on YouTube, within a click of a button, you look up oatmeal Babino Caro, you got so many renditions of it.
Yeah.
I'm going back in the day when I was going to college. I worked at a library. That's where I found out my information. I had an encyclopedia set in my room. So, and I tell my nieces and nephews that, they're like, "You had an encyclopedia set?" I had World Book.
That was our Google.
Yes, that was our Google. And then there was another one, but this one was for Black singers. It was a thick volume. I have to ask my mom what it was, but it was like a Black encyclopedia. And in that encyclopedia, I learned about Shirley Barrett, Grace Bunbury, God rest her soul, George Shirley, Rary Grist. That's where I learned about those singers, Simon Estes. But nowadays, it seems like the more information you have, the less educated you can be, depending on how you take in that information. And that's what's happening. We have so much information. And then if you're on social media, social media there are some good channels, but you have so much stuff. It's not, how do these younger singers get to the right thing? It takes people like us and professors and stuff to talk to them, to tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the pandemic is easing up. Where do you hope that the opera industry gets accomplished now that the pandemic is easing up? Where do you see that?
I want the opera industry to reach millions of people. I'm tired of opera being the big fish in the small pond, meaning when you just work in an opera house or amongst opera people, and your feed, your social media feed is just that, you tend to think that the world knows what's going on. I'm going to go back to one of the reasons why the criticism came. I'm going to go on record to say, I'm not criticizing what was done with the platforms. Everybody did what they could do, and they excelled in what they did, and it made a difference with their careers. I applaud you for that. When you can reach millions of people and you can affect different industries in a tremendous way, you get to the point where opera is known and is relatable, even if a person never stepped foot in an opera house. This is so timely. I was reading an article this morning about Taylor Swift, and they were saying how just her tour alone, of course, we know it's generating hundreds of millions of dollars. But the people who are working in Etsy, who are creating their own fashion lines based on her tour, are making a pretty penny. It's about affecting a mass amount of people, because when you do that, your wealth is spread throughout. So that's what I'd like to see. And I think it can happen. I think that it can reach millions of people and touch even more lives, even those who, you're not going to get everybody to come to the opera house, but you can have people who never gone be so familiar with opera that they're buying more records. They're following more opera singers. I would love to see that.
I believe opera should become more mainstream. There used to be a time when they had the the televised version of the Grammys. There was always an opera, a classical section, whether it be an instrumentalist or a singer. The thing that stood in my mind the most, and no, it was not Aretha Franklin, God rest her soul, singing Nessun Dorma. That's a whole other show.
I thought you were going to mention her.
Whole other show was Carolyn Blackwell. Carolyn Blackwell sang Summertime, the Simon Rattle production, which was recorded.
Mm-hmm.
She opened up the show. You could hear a pin drop after she finished that last note between her singing, the music ending, and the crazy applause. They had never heard anything like that. They were beyond. I mean, people were on their feet, and that sticks with me. Classical music had always been part of the Grammys, so it wasn't unfamiliar to the audience. But that type of singing was glorious, and that's where I want opera to get back to. I want the audience to hear something that's so, not only the audience inside the theater, but the audience watching on television.
Right.
Here's something so glorious. Look, Maria Callas, Renata Tebaldi, always on page 6. What happened to that? Nobody's interested anymore. Opera is not this elitist form. We got to get out of that. We got to break that stereotype. If we can do that, make it just as interesting, just as common as going to see a movie, then I think we can accomplish something.
This is Juicy Interludes, not your typical opera podcast, with your host, Angela Renée Simpson. And remember, you don't have to listen to me, but you do have to listen to your audience.